Lovelock Cave is in northwestern Nevada, located north of modern-day Humboldt Sink. The cave is in the Lake Lahontan region, next to and overlooking the former lake bed of Lake Lahontan. It is about 1 hour and 45 minutes from Reno, and a two-wheel drive vehicle can make it down the dirt roads. Lovelock Cave was used by many people from different cultures, groups, and generations, with first occupation going as far back as 2,600 years before Common Era. It became heavily occupied around 1050 BCE. The dry environment of the cave resulted in a wealth of well-preserved artifacts that included some pieces of clothing that were of a size to fit people of a larger stature. Now, unfortunately, the initial discoveries of artifacts and excavations in the early 20th century were poorly executed, which resulted in a loss of archaeological information. This was around 1911. Now, I've been able to find data in Reno showing that several large skeletons were dumped down the hillside as the original owners were more interested in the mining of bat guano for fertilizer sales. Then those first excavating were more interested in artifacts to sell. There was little interest being put into skeletal remains that had little economic value at the time. So Lovelock Cave is famous because we're told that giants occupied the caves at a later period. These were the Si-Te-Cah, meaning tule or reed eaters in Paiute language. Now the Paiute got tired of these red-headed cannibal giants supposedly eating them, so they formed an alliance with other local tribes, bottlenecked the entrance to the cave, and set the front on fire. Supposedly the giants inside were killed by smoke inhalation, fire, or shot with projectile points when trying to make a break for the exit, and that was the end of them. Fortunately, the giants looked to have escaped in real life and remained in the area, or they actually migrated to the Pacific Northwest. Now, John T. Reed and several Paiute state the last giant did not die off until around 1874 near Pyramid Lake. Okay, I want to point out cave condition. Black manganese oxide depositing fungus, widely distributed in the cave. Also see an accumulation of fungal melanins. Iron oxides, hematite, limonite appear to be staining the walls. It looks like the entrance was modified to allow for easy visitation and a viewing platform to be put in. This has modified the humidity in the cave and allowed greater moisture at the exposed entrance. The climate has been dramatically changed. A ton of lint can be seen in the cave, and I'm sure this is stuck to every surface there. There are tons of airborne particles in the cave. Multiple openings allow lots of airflow. Part of the walls are covered in a black layer of soot from fire, so this may go with the Paiute having burned out the Si-Te-Cah. It's possible, I guess. And then we also see pack rat middens in the back corners of the cave. Things to remember right here. The miners, they took out 4 to 7 feet of bat guano, tons of bones and artifacts dumped down the hillside. Only exotic finds were kept by them. Afterwards, several excavations took place by different scientists and universities, so the artifacts are distributed all over the place. I see areas in the cave that are filled back in. I see locations where no research or excavation ever happened. I see minor passages never checked out or excavated that could lead to new finds and shine a light into the dark past. Unfortunately, because of the constant occupation of the cave at different times by many different groups, it's been difficult to form a correct timeline of what was there, who was there, and at what time, and what artifacts belong to each group. Why is Lovelock Cave so famous? Because of the stories of the red-headed cannibal giants that were killed there. Now, I'm fascinated with those beings of great stature that were here before Homo sapien. Some even survived into a later period and became the living gods of man. But we have so little evidence. Why? Well, a friend of mine who's a famous paranormal researcher and a remote viewer told me he once saw a 7-foot-plus skeleton with red hair on display in Virginia City, Nevada, which happens to only be 2 hours away from Lovelock Cave. I was intrigued by his story since I've been to Virginia City many times, never seen any remains on display. Well, guess what? A little research led me to find out that he was right, and people saw this skeleton all the way up until the late 1980s. Then suddenly, poof, gone. But why? Well, it comes down to what's known as NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990. No longer are you allowed to have those remains on display, and they can be repatriated to the indigenous people of the area. Also, there's a Nevada SB 244 Assembly Bill of 2018 that further restricts access to even photos of any Native American human remains. I discussed this with the curator of manuscripts at the Nevada Historical Society in Reno, the lead archaeologist for BLM Nevada State Office, and the curator of anthropology for the Nevada State Museum of Collections, which, by the way, has a collection for Lovelock Cave that has over 1,500 artifacts in it. And they all agreed because of NAGPRA, it's become almost impossible to view the remains unless you have some type of need for it and are associated with the museum or with the university. Along this line, we've also heard that the Smithsonian Institute has destroyed or hidden remains of the giants on purpose. Well, the Smithsonian Institute does not appear to have destroyed remains of giants to protect the mainstream chronology of human evolution at the onset of the 20th century. Instead, I found that local historians and anthropologists from nearby universities were employed by the Smithsonian to conduct excavations and research into remains of giants, or at least past humans of great stature. What appears to have happened was that the human remains or giant remains were placed into the archives or university museums, eventually lost, mislabeled, or damaged, even destroyed. Many remains were auctioned to the highest bidders by those owners of the private property where excavations were taking place. Bribes and payoffs were given to acquire some of the remains. Remains were not as important as artifacts and were left out in the open, where the air and weather events almost immediately destroyed the fragile remains before any photos or drawings could be made of them. And remains were turned over to the indigenous people of the area because of that NAGPRA law and the state laws governing human remains of the past. This is the reason for the loss of so much information. There was a Lovelock culture mixed with a group smaller in population but larger and taller in physical size. Eventually, both were replaced by the northern Paiute, and subsequent excavations in 1912 and 1924 brought to light thousands of ancient artifacts, including a well-worn size 29 sandal. Last to discuss in the cave is what people have stated is a giant handprint. Again, I've looked at this quite a bit, and personally, I just believe it's staining, natural staining of the walls.